Visit a Spectrum store today.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. Federal investigators delivering an update on their investigation into a deadly collision over the Potomac River at the end of January. Investigators say the crew of the military helicopter that collided with an American Airlines jet may not have heard instructions from an air traffic controller to pass behind the plane.
This particular flight was a check ride. A check ride is a practical exam that a pilot must pass to be qualified to perform specific aircrew or mission duties.
New tensions in Eastern Europe after Ukraine claims a Russian drone struck the former nuclear plant in Chernobyl. Vice President J.D. Vance met with Ukraine's president Friday, where Zelensky told Vance his country wants security guarantees before any talks to end the Ukraine-Russia war.
We want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road.
Pope Francis has been hospitalized in Rome for bronchitis in the latest string of issues that have raised concerns about the 88-year-old's health. The Vatican says the Pope will undergo medical examinations and has canceled engagements for the next 3 days. The Pontiff has made a number of visits to the hospital in recent years. And that is a look at your Spectrum News in 90.
Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Jason Fechner, political anchor at Spectrum News, in for Errol Lewis. We launched this program last year to focus on the biggest deal that there is in America, the future of our country. And with the new administration and a new Congress, we will cover the new people, policies, and politics that are shaping the nation. The big deal this week is the unfolding upheaval at the Department of Justice. A handful of federal prosecutors have handed in their resignations after refusing an order to drop corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. This marks the most public turmoil within the federal government now since President Donald Trump's return, and comes just days after Pam Bondi was sworn in as Attorney General. We'll get to all that and a whole lot more on tonight's episode, but first, here's some reaction to all of this from Washington, D.C.
So when you say resign, they're going to be gone anyway. But I know nothing about the individual case. I know that they didn't feel it was much of a case. They also felt that it was unfair with the election. Look, I would know that better than anybody because I was weaponized more than any human being in the history probably of the world.
These are very troubling developments, and we're going to have to get some real answers to questions that relate to how the Department of Justice directive came about.
DOJ, I guess, evaluated the case and made a determination. I mean, the question to me is, were the charges appropriate to begin with?
I think that prospect is very concerning given how President Trump operates, how he absolutely seems to be gutting the Department of Justice, the FBI. He's going across all federal agencies, installing political appointees.
Joining us now with some political analysis are two of the smartest people in the country when it comes to politics. Susan Arbiter, a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Albany, and Taylor Popolars, the Spectrum News national political reporter there at the White House, covering the Trump administration out of Washington, D.C. Wonderful to see you both. And Taylor, let's start with you. Is this all a sign of what the next 4 years are going to look like? Critics say it's the Trump administration, of course, prioritizing their political agenda over upholding the law. The president's supporters say this is simply a part of draining the swamp.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone if they heard any of Donald Trump's campaign rallies over the course of his 2-year re-election bid, because he promised to do exactly this. He said point blank, and I'm quoting him, that this was about retribution, that he felt the justice system had wronged him and so many of his allies in so many different ways. Whether that's legitimate or not could be up for debate from legal analysts. But the reality is he pledged to return to the White House and to push people out who he viewed as adversaries. So we're seeing that at multiple levels across the Justice Department, ranging from broad federal levels, even taking away former President Joe Biden's security clearance and access to intelligence briefings, to more local ones like Letitia James in New York having her security clearance to an extent taken away. Obviously, she had prosecuted Donald Trump before he returned to the White House. So this is something that the Trump administration says shouldn't be a surprise. But as you noted, critics, especially Democrats, say this is a weaponization of the government, which is a line the Trump folks used over the last 2 years. The Trump team insists that this is about rooting out corruption, and I think it's going to continue throughout the next 4 years.
Susan, fascinating to watch this all play out as the week went along. The department's public integrity section, which had been asked to take over the case, also saw resignations there. We should note that these high-level prosecutors who quit are not liberal Democrats. What reasons have they been given for the resignations?
Yeah, Jason, this week the acting deputy attorney general directed the Southern District of New York to drop all charges against Mayor Eric Adams, with a caveat that they would leave the door open to maybe refiling the charges against Adams until after the mayoral election. That demand, in turn, led to a cascade of 7 resignations, first by the Trump-appointed Republican acting U.S. Attorney for Manhattan, Danielle Sassoon, you just saw her photo, who once clerked for Antonin Scalia, then by 2 other attorneys tasked with prosecuting corruption, and then by 4 other deputies in what a lot of people are comparing to the Saturday Night Massacre, a Watergate reference. Now, in her resignation letter, the acting U.S. Attorney for Manhattan, this Danielle Sassoon, pointed out that the mayor's lawyers had repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo, and that the directive made a point of saying that Washington officials had not evaluated the strength of the evidence or the legal theory behind the case. And that issue appears to have been the last straw for these 7 attorneys.
All right, Taylor, let's move on to some other news of the week out there, because there has been a lot on Wednesday. Of course, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the deployment of American troops in Ukraine is unlikely. But then a day later, Vice President J.D. Vance said that everything's on the table if Russia does not agree to negotiate to end the war. Is the White House kind of having an issue when it comes to consistent messaging right now?
Well, to an extent, yes, just because you're having these new officials. J.D. Vance, of course, is only a few days or a few weeks into being vice president. Pete Hegseth is brand new to the role of defense secretary, and these are their initial appearances on the world stage at these security conferences and at these other gatherings of world leaders across the world. I think what's important to note is that each of them has clarified since that they defer to what President Trump is saying. They defer to the decisions that President Trump is ultimately going to make, and they make very clear that because he's the president, the buck will kind of stop with him. But as you pointed out, there has been confusion, especially from allies and adversaries of the United States, trying to figure out what exactly will be the United States posture when it comes to the war between Russia and Ukraine, if U.S. troops will be involved. You have to remember, we have alliances with other countries like NATO, for instance, that if U.S. troops get involved or if a NATO allies troops get involved in a conflict, that involves multiple countries' armies and militaries responding. So this could be significant. President Trump has indicated that he really wants to reopen communication channels with Russia. He had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week that lasted over 90 minutes. That's at least one interaction that they've had. He said he wants to meet with Putin. So this is a very fluid situation, but it's a reminder that in administrations like this, the president is the ultimate spokesperson, and even his deputies sometimes cross the line and then have to walk it back because their words matter.
Those fluid situations keeping you on your toes there at the White House. Taylor, Susan, lastly, Americans, of course, still dealing with countless issues tied to inflation and higher prices out there. We saw some new data this week that those prices aren't likely to come down anytime soon, and it was an issue that drove so many voters to the polls in November. Does this seem to be an issue that the White House is focused on right now, or is there simply too much else going on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other things going on. The president did say that he would deal with inflation on day one, but he's clearly been focused on other priorities, from Ukraine to Israel to Elon Musk's cuts to the federal bureaucracy. Like other presidents in their first weeks, Trump has really been trying to do as much as he can to try to sort of unilaterally log some wins. But soon Trump's focus is going to need to shift to March 14th. That is the day the federal government will shut down. And because to prevent that, he needs to negotiate with some Democrats, he might not be able to focus on the price of eggs for a while.
A fascinating few weeks ahead for all of us out there. Susan, Taylor, thank you both so much for your time and, of course, your insight as well. Coming up, we're going to talk about the effect the president's mass deportation threats could have on the agriculture industry and farms across this country. Stay with us.
We said we'd never break the 3-second rule. Never do that. And never become a minivan mom.
Hey, Chris.
As parents, we say never a lot, but never happens. So when you say you'd never leave your child in a hot car, know it can happen. Before you leave the car, always stop, look, lock.
Great news, Spectrum Internet customers. Now you can try Spectrum Mobile risk-free for a full year at no cost to you. It's easier than ever to switch. Bring your own device and we'll pay off your phone balance up to $500 per line. Spectrum Mobile brings you a reliable nationwide 5G network you can count on wherever you go. Plus, upgrade your phone anytime, as many times as you want, for any reason when you get Unlimited Plus. Call or visit a store near you. Our specialists are ready to help you switch.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable. The sad reality is fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kitchen now.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
With a big deal, and there's a lot going on our nation's farms and in the agriculture industry as a whole, from proposed tariffs, the bird flu, and uncertainty around the federal freeze on foreign aid, which costs American farmers billions of dollars. In addition, President Donald Trump's threat of a sweeping crackdown on undocumented immigrants and mass deportations could have a major effect on the trillion-dollar industry, which relies on migrant labor. Here's a look at the top agricultural states out there, including California, Texas, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Estimates show upwards of 42% of hired crop farm workers supporting the industry are not legally authorized to work in the United States right now. That threat of deportation is already hitting local farms across the country, creating fear among undocumented workers who are skipping work. Spectrum News reporter Taylor Torregano has the story of one legal center in California that's crisscrossing the farmland there to educate workers on their rights.
This is his first day back to work in days. And even with 35 years harvesting strawberries and apples from here to Washington State, this farm worker, who'd like to be known as Jose, says he's never been more afraid of deportation while he earns a living.
Tengo miedo por mis amigos.
He says he's scared for all of his family and friends, many of whom, like him, are also staying home due to fears of deportation. In fact, the head of this farm says 55 workers were on the schedule for today, and only 5 showed up because of rumors of unannounced Border Patrol raids in Riverside County. Jose says he would have stayed home again too, but he can't afford to any longer. He has 6 little mouths to feed.
Es muy duro y mal pagado.
He says it's an honor to provide fresh produce to his community, but this job is very heavy and difficult with low pay, and all he's trying to do is make a steady living. Which is why Luz Gallegos and her team at Todec Legal Center say it's so important for the 5 farm workers who did show up to learn their rights as undocumented immigrants. Their organization is a lifeline for immigrants across the Inland Empire and Coachella Valley.
This is really not only impacting our families, it's impacting our economy, because if we don't have local workforce, guess what? Food, as it is, inflation's already up.
She says she's been getting calls from local schools that parents are keeping their students home, and their office has been inundated with community members desperate for information as the Trump administration says it's focused on launching the largest mass deportation operation in American history. Her staff and hundreds of volunteers who have been hitting the ground daily to educate this community on their protections under the U.S. Constitution. Their palpable fears bringing Luz to tears in their defense.
They're not criminals, they're workers, they just want to work, and, just seeing men that, they're just very strong, and then them breaking down and at our Know Your Rights sessions to say, why are they doing this to us? We just want to work.
It's the case for Jose, who says he just wants to continue working and providing for his family. Taylor Torgano, Spectrum News.
And joining us now with much more on all of this is Andy Vance, Spectrum News agriculture expert there in Columbus, Ohio. Andy, thanks for the time here today.
Yeah, thanks. This is a tough subject. As you heard, a lot of passion, a lot of concern.
Indeed it is. Many farmers are skeptical that Trump will actually follow through on this promise now to deport more than 40% of undocumented farm workers out there. Similar threats in his first term, of course, never came to fruition. But if the administration followed through this time around, who replaces them? How do these farms survive?
That's been the watchword for decades when agriculture groups have been talking about immigration reform, is that these immigrant laborers are doing jobs that Americans won't do. You've heard that phrase my entire journalistic career, because the jobs are difficult. They have been in very challenging conditions. When you're picking strawberries in California, it's hot, it's humid, it's backbreaking labor, so to speak. If you're working in the livestock sector, it's very challenging physical labor that especially younger American workers don't want to do. So the question of who replaces them is a bit of an open question. I don't think there's a great answer to that.
A close Trump advisor, of course, Stephen Miller, says that American workers could replace them. We don't think that that's the case, do we?
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of that, because you haven't seen it happen basically in my adult life. I grew up baling hay or working in tobacco fields. The farmers I grew up working for, they can't find, used to be teenage or young adults working their way through high school or college. Those kids, so to speak, don't want to do those jobs. And the other part of it is the amount that you have to pay the average American worker who would be physically fit enough to do those jobs. They can go get, let's say, $15 at a minimum wage working at, some food service institution, and say, I'd rather go do that than go work in a field picking fruits, vegetables, or working in a meat processing facility. So the economics of the labor become more and more difficult as well.
To that end, what would then be the economic impact of a labor shortage out there, not just on those farm owners or workers, but for folks at the grocery store like you and I?
Yeah, that's the thing we got to think about, is we're already seeing inflationary food prices, right? That was one of the things that the president campaigned on. And the direct relationship between increased farm labor expenses is going to feed right into increased food prices, because you're going to see supply and demand come into work. If I can't afford to pay workers, that means that I'm not going to be able to get the crops harvested and get them to field and so on and so forth. It just trickles to lower supply, higher prices, and you're you're going to see, as much as companies are able to pass those labor costs on, individual farmers can't usually do that. But larger companies that might be relying on large chunks of migrant labor, immigrant labor, might be able to pass those on to retail. You will see higher food costs if the president's threats are carried on and we see mass deportations. Absolutely will lead to higher food costs.
Let's quickly talk a bit about the H-2A visa program, which provides temporary work visas to seasonal farm workers from other countries to come here. The number of issued visas has been on the rise each and every year, and experts say that Trump could expand the program to fill any gaps in labor. But I understand that these visas have a bit of a history of being notoriously abusive to foreign workers out there.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern that you hear folks talk about. On the farmer side of things, the bigger concern is that the process is really cumbersome. The burden on the employer, applying for it and going through the regulatory schema is challenging. So you have seen something like a 65% increase in the number of certified H-2A workers in the ag space between, say, 2017 and 2022. But it's a long process. It's a very complicated application process. So the idea that we're just going to somehow flip the switch and get a bunch more H-2A workers, I think is a bit far-fetched. Again, we haven't seen that be the case. You have seen a big increase, but it's on a nominal basis, you're talking about a couple 100,000 workers, which may not be enough to make up the gap in certain segments of the workforce.
Similar to much of the country in my home state of Wisconsin, there's so much fear and uncertainty in the undocumented community right now. And last week I spoke with Melissa Sanchez, a reporter with ProPublica, about that fear. She shared the story about one undocumented worker that she'd met with so far. Take a listen.
He's a cook inside of a restaurant outside of Madison, and he happens to live in an apartment that's right above the restaurant where he works. And he described his life as being really isolated right now because he's so afraid to be outside and to kind of, to potentially end up in the crosshairs of whether police or immigration. And so he said he goes downstairs to work and upstairs to sleep and downstairs to work. And he sort of laughed and said he feels like a little mouse.
Andy, is that the type of fear that you're also seeing there in Ohio?
Well, I think in all of the segments we're talking about, she gave a really great example. You could be talking about people working in meat processing facilities where we have high percentage Hispanic labor. And let's think about this too, not just the undocumented workers, but if you're a worker of Hispanic origin who is working here legally, what's your fear level of getting swept up in these immigration raids if ICE busts down the door at your place of employment?
Andy, thank you so much. And we're not done just yet. Next, we're going to talk more about the president's cabinet nominees. Stay with us.
For the millions of school-age children across the country, the state of their schools can have a lasting impact on their health and well-being.
The majority of school districts aren't doing comprehensive regular water quality testing.
As CO2 levels rise in a space, cognitive function takes a direct decline.
We visit 2 school districts working to create safe and healthy environments for their students.
Watch Exploring Your Health, Curing Our Classrooms. Available on the Spectrum News app.
When you know you can go anywhere because you have a connection that's built for everywhere. That's life unlimited. That's Spectrum.
I tell my son, I love you every single day. I love you. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now that he's a grandfather, he says, I love you to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
Food
isn't just fuel to live, it's fuel to grow. My family relied on public assistance to help provide meals for us. These meals fueled my involvement in theater and the arts as a child, which fostered my love for acting. The Feeding America network of food banks helps millions of people put food on the table. When people are fed, futures are nourished. Join the movement to end hunger, and together we can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Visit feedingamerica.org/actnow.
With the big deal on Capitol Hill, hearings and votes on President Donald Trump's cabinet nominees have been dominating the Senate floor, and this week, a handful of them were confirmed by the chamber. That includes two of the president's most controversial picks there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, as health secretary, and Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence. That puts the total of confirmed positions at 16 out of 22, with many already at work carrying out President Trump's agenda. Joining us now with much more on all of this is Spectrum News political reporter Reuben Jones. Reuben, great to see you. And among Senate Republicans, former Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell standing alone. He joined Democrats this week in voting no against both RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. Is he kind of becoming the new face of the anti-Trump movement among Republicans?
At this moment, he is, Jason. Good to see you, at least during these confirmation hearings. Mitch McConnell is taking a stand, and he's taking it hard, at least voting against some of these pivotal nominations. The one reason he's standing out is because some of the other Republicans who were considered more swing votes, people like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, even Tom Tillis, have fallen in line on some of these controversial picks, as you just noted there, Jason. So the question here is going to be whether McConnell will stay that way over the next few years. And it's not clear that he will. He will likely fall behind Trump on a number of the legislation he wants to do. But on some of these controversial confirmations, he is standing against Trump. Not a surprise in Robert F. Kennedy Jr., given that McConnell is a survivor of polio. And the one thing I'll mention, Jason, that people can easily forget is that this is a much different Senate than it was in Trump's first administration, a Senate that is much more pro-Trump. There are a lot of those skeptical Republicans in the first time are not around this time. So Trump could have much smoother sailing this time around in the Senate.
To that end, I believe these are the fastest confirmations we've seen since around 2001 or so. Now that he has the job, meanwhile, RFK Jr. will have to see through the president's agenda. What are kind of the biggest challenges awaiting him in that role?
Well, he's got a crisis right off the bat, Jason, and that is the bird flu, where 68 human cases have already occurred in the past year. There are some health experts who warn this could become a pandemic. So the concerns aren't just the rising egg prices, but also the potential health risks as we go forward. And so he's going to face this right off the bat. And the question is, will some of his changes that he wants to put into place, will that hamper the efforts to combat the bird flu? I'm thinking about things like the potential job cuts that he wants to put in place at the HHS. And also, of course, the U.S. has said it will withdraw from the World Health Organization, which could hurt the effects of trying to combat the bird flu. And then, of course, the U.S. is not giving as much aid in terms of funding for USAID. So that could be critical in this conversation as well.
Finally, Reuben, quickly this week, a Senate panel voted to advance the nomination of Kash Patel, the president's pick, of course, to lead the FBI. Do you think he is also on track for confirmation potentially next week?
As of right now, there don't seem to be major hurdles. Democrats have bashed Kash Patel a lot, but Republicans, we're hearing some concerns, but not necessarily any Republicans saying they are going to be opposed to him. Jason, that vote likely going to come next week.
All right, the wonderful Reuben Jones for us. Reuben, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us here on The Big Deal. We'll see you next week. Stay tuned to your local station.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Our journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices.
The future is here with Spectrum Mobile and the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra with Galaxy AI. Do more than ever before by handling multiple tasks with a single ask through Google Gemini. And start the day smarter with Now Brief, insights that keep you ahead. Power it all with the fastest wireless speeds from Spectrum Mobile. Order the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra with Galaxy AI from Spectrum and get $700 off with trade-in. And now Spectrum Internet customers can try Spectrum Mobile risk-free for a full year at no cost.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
Weather can be beautiful, inconvenient, and at times, powerful. And it affects everything we do. At Spectrum News Plus, our weather experts update you with the information and the context you need so you can better plan your day. And we do it every 10 minutes. We're the calm in the storm. Weather on the Ones on Spectrum News Plus, exclusively on Spectrum. And get your weather anytime on the Spectrum News app. Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now.